Sorceress girl.
In a small village on the edge of the dark forest, where the fog was so thick that it was impossible to see your own hand during the day, lived a girl named Evelyn. She was always a little different from the rest of the children. Her eyes sometimes glowed green in the dark, and in the first days of autumn, when the leaves turned copper red, there was a strange smell in the air, the smell of bark, rot and something else, elusive and unpleasant. Evelyn lived on the outskirts of the village in a small hut made of dark wood that had long been bent and bent under its own weight. The people of the village rarely visited Evelyn. They whispered about her, called her a sorcerer girl, and were wary of strange sounds that came from her house at night, then laughter, then crying, then whispering in a language that no one understood. Even cats and dogs were afraid to approach her yard. Evelyn didn't pay attention to the condemnation. She often sat by the old mirror hanging on the wall of her room and studied strange books she inherited from her grandmother, a woman whom the peasants called a witch during her lifetime. There were records of spells, magic formulas and strange symbols that glowed in the dark. One day, in the very north, when the moon hung over the village, like a silver lantern in the black sky, Evelyn decided to test the strongest spell that her grandmother wrote about. It was supposed to open the doors between the worlds, and Evelyn prepared for a long time. She drew a circle of chalk on the floor, lit black candles and whispered words that made the air tremble. At first, nothing happened. But then the mirror in front of her trembled, and a movement appeared on its surface, a shadow that did not belong to any object in the room. The shadow began to speak to her in a low, hoarse voice. "Evelyn. I'm waiting for you." The girl did not feel fear. Her eyes lit up with a green light, she stretched out her hands, and the shadow seemed to draw her into herself. When Evelyn felt a cold breath on her skin, she realized, the world she stepped into was completely different, full of darkness, whispers and unknown creatures watching her every move. In the village the next morning they found an empty house. Only on the floor, in the chalk circle, there was a small green spark, evidence that the girl did not leave, but disappeared in another world. Since the time when darkness fell in the village and the fog slowly covered the fields and forests, people sometimes heard a soft whisper. "I'm here. I'm waiting." And those who dared to look into Evelyn's dark house saw a green light sign on the walls, a witch sign that still existed somewhere between the world of the living and the world of shadows. It's been a few weeks since Evelyn disappeared. The village gradually began to forget about her, but those who still saw her house felt the cold that penetrated the bones, even when it was sunny outside. Some children who happened to approach the hut returned home pale and trembling, whispering about the lights that ran across the walls and the shadows that moved without the owner. That evening, when the moon again hung low, the village was attacked by a thick fog. He slid out of the forest, wrapping paths and huts, and soon even adults began to get lost in confusion. That's when some daredevils, despite their fear, went to check Evelyn's hut. When they opened the door, they saw her. She was standing inside, but no longer quite human. Her skin was pale like marble, her eyes were even brighter greener, and her fingers seemed to be able to penetrate the walls. She looked at them and smiled softly, but that smile was not human. It was cold, like an echo of death. "You came to me," Evelyn said in a voice that sounded like her own and as many other voices together. People were numb. One wrong word, one wrong move, and they felt the air become thick, like a linger, and a whisper began to slowly fill their heads. Each shadow in the room began to move separately, as if it had its own life. I can show you the world," Evelyn said, raising her hands. And immediately the floor under the feet of the daredevils began to open, forming a dark whirlpool. The shouts echoed through the house, but no one from the outside heard anything. Those who looked at her began to see the past and the future at the same time. They saw their own fears, losses, secrets that they never dared to tell. Some of them fell to their knees, others fled, but the fog overtook them. Evelyn's whispers echoed in their heads even as they fled the village. Since then, even when the house remained empty, its spirit hovered over the village. Anyone who dared to go to the forest or stay alone at night was haunted by the shadow of a girl with green eyes. Sometimes, when the moon is high, you could see the silhouette of Evelyn on the horizon, watching the village live her usual life, but already under her invisible control. And those who tried to deceive her or challenge her disappeared forever. Only in the fog did a light green light trail remain, proof that Evelyn is always there and that she is waiting. She is waiting for the next one who dares to enter a world where she is the Queen of Shadows. It's been months since the first daredevils tried to get close to Evelyn's hut. The fog became a constant guest of the village, even during the day it did not dissipate completely. People began to notice that cattle mysteriously disappeared, and some children became sick and weak for no apparent reason. The elders whispered to each other, "The witch girl, she's back, she feeds on our fears." One evening, the bravest young man named Thomas decided to go into the forest and destroy Evelyn's hut. He took a torch, a knife and several amulets that allegedly protected against dark magic. His steps wheezed on the dry leaves, and the fog enveloped his shoulders as if he was alive. When he reached the hut, the door opened by itself, and she, Evelyn, emerged from the darkness, but now her appearance was even more creepy. Her hair turned black, and her eyes shone with a bright green light that seemed to pierce the soul. "You came," she said softly, and the words cut the night like a cold knife. "But you're not ready." Thomas tried to throw the amulet, but it hung in the air, like an invisible hand, and crumbled into dust. Evelyn's shadow widened, filling the entire room, and the young man felt his fear becoming physical pain. He saw his own fears, darkness, loneliness, the loss of his family. And they came to life before him, whispering his name. "I feed on fear," Evelyn said, and her voice echoed in Thomas's head at the same time as everything he saw. "He who is afraid gives me strength, and whoever dares to challenge stays here forever in my world." At that moment, Thomas realized that there was no back door. His body froze, and his mind fell to pieces. Evelyn raised her hands, and the green energy began to pull out his fears, turning them into light crumbs that fed her magic. The village woke up the next morning from a silence that was worse than any noise. No one else saw Thomas. Evelyn's hut stood empty again, but the green light trail shone even brighter. From then on, residents began to avoid the forest even during the day, and those who stayed in the house for too long disappeared. Sometimes on the horizon you could see Evelyn walking between the trees, her eyes burning with green fire and the shadows around her dancing. She was no longer just a witch girl, now she was a creature living from the fear and darkness of everyone who dares to confront her. Village legends say, if you hear a quiet whisper in the fog and a green light breaks through the night, Evelyn is somewhere nearby. And then there is only one thing left: run, hide, and pray that she doesn't notice you. Over the years, Evelyn's fear only grew. The forest became an impassable dark wall for anyone who tried to pass through it, and the fog that enveloped the village did not recede even on the brightest days. Children were not allowed to play in the fields alone, and adults were not allowed to go out after sunset. But one day an old traveler named Simon appeared. He had long heard the legends about the witch girl, but he knew that Evelyn's strength was not just in magic, she lived thanks to people's fear. He explained to the peasants, if you stop being afraid, she will lose her strength. Fear is her energy. Most people didn't believe it. But the three brave, Liam, Mary and John, decided to act. They went to the hut, each carrying symbols of faith, courage and light, amulets, sacred candles, old amulets that have survived from ancient times. When they opened the door, Evelyn appeared in front of them, her eyes turned green, and the shadows around her whispered and howled. But this time, Liam, Mary, and John didn't feel fear. Their hearts beat firmly and their eyes were clear. Finally, someone, brave. Evelyn whispered, but her voice sounded shaky. She felt her strength begin to melt. Liam raised the candle, and its flames destroyed the shadows that enveloped the room. Mary dispelled the fog with an amulet, and John cast the courage spell that old Simon taught them. Evelyn's green light began to fade, her silhouette became more transparent, and the whisper turned into a soft cry. "You aren't afraid," she said barely audibly, and suddenly a large mirror opened that reflected not a shadow, but her true face. There was no more anger in him, only loneliness and pain. "I was just a girl who wanted to be loved," Evelyn whispered, and the last green ray of light fell from her eyes. "But fear made me who I became." And at that moment she disappeared. The forest remained dark, but the fog gradually dissipated. The village became bright again, and people were able to breathe deeply. No one heard the whisper in the night fog anymore, and the hut, once cursed, turned into an ordinary old dwelling, without shadows and fear. But the legends about Evelyn remained. People passed them to their children, reminding them, fear can create a monster, but courage can defeat it. And, when the fog appears on the horizon, some old people say they hear a soft whisper, like a reminder, Evelyn's power was once real, and it was only up to the courage of the people that she would return.